The car was on fire, thick black smoke rolling from under the hood, turning the evening sky a dirty shade of gray. Inside the back seat, my 13-year-old daughter, Madison, who was born with cerebral palsy, screamed and kicked against the locked doors. Her wheelchair was strapped down, making it impossible for her to move. Across the driveway, arms crossed with a cold smirk on her face, stood Denise, the HOA president who everyone in Sycamore Hollow Estates feared, but few dared confront. She refused to open the gate. She refused to let me get to my daughter. "You're not authorized to park here," she shrieked at me while Madison banged helplessly on the window, the flames licking higher. The metal door handle was too hot to touch. I could hear Madison coughing, the heat growing by the second. Denise's hand hovered over her walkie-talkie, her face twisted in satisfaction like she had finally caught the lawbreaker she'd been chasing for months. She had no idea who she was messing with. I was an ex-police commander, and right there, I made a decision that would change everything. But before we get there, let me tell you how this nightmare began. It all started about 3 months earlier when we moved into Sycamore Hollow Estates, a sleepy little gated community in suburban Texas. My wife, Rachel, and I thought it would be the perfect place to raise Madison. The lawns were manicured, the neighbors smiled and waved. It all looked so peaceful compared to the noise and rush of the city. We used the money from my early retirement, after 20 years with the department, to finally buy a house big enough for Madison's medical equipment and therapy space. Everything seemed perfect. The house needed some repairs, sure, but nothing major. We were just grateful for the chance to start fresh. But it didn't take long before the letters started showing up. At first, they were polite reminders. Little notes in our mailbox about our trash bins being out 5 minutes too long, or the grass being a little too tall. Silly things. We didn't pay much attention. After all, we had more important concerns. Getting Madison enrolled in her new school, setting up her care team, making sure she felt at home. Then came Denise. She was in her late 50s, always wore a starched blouse tucked into khaki shorts, and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her hair was pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. She would patrol the streets twice a day, once at sunrise and once just before sunset, always looking for trouble. She found it in us. Denise didn't like that Madison's medical van was parked in our driveway. Even though it was allowed under HOA rules, she claimed it was an eyesore and threatened fines. We explained, calmly at first, that Madison couldn't use a regular car. The van was specially equipped for her wheelchair and medical needs. We even offered to show her the paperwork. She didn't care. "You people think the rules don't apply to you because you have special circumstances," she said once, waving her hand like Madison's condition was just an inconvenience for her. Rachel cried that night. Madison didn't understand why we were suddenly getting in trouble all the time when we were just living our lives. And me? I felt a rage deep inside me that I hadn't felt since my days on the force, the kind that made your fingers twitch and your jaw lock tight. But I promised myself I wouldn't cause a scene. I dealt with people like Denise before, power-hungry, bitter, and bored with their own lives. They thrived on confrontation. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. For a while, things settled down. We adjusted to the constant little battles, the fines for unauthorized decorations, when Madison put up a rainbow flag for Pride Month, the warnings for excessive noise when we hosted her birthday party. We kept our heads down and stayed polite. Then came the day of the fire. It was a hot Saturday afternoon. Rachel had taken the car to run errands, and Madison and I were heading home from her therapy session across town. I pulled into the neighborhood, but the main gate wouldn't open. Denise was standing there, blocking the keypad, arms crossed. "You're not allowed to enter through the residence gate," she snapped. "I live here," I said, trying to stay calm. "You know that. Your vehicle isn't registered properly," she insisted. "You'll have to park outside and walk." I looked at Madison, who was already exhausted from therapy, her cheeks pink from the heat. She couldn't walk across the long parking lot. I told Denise firmly that we needed to get home, that this was ridiculous. She refused to move. At that moment, a strange smell hit my nose, sharp, bitter, like burning plastic. I looked down at the van's dashboard. The temperature gauge was in the red. Smoke began curling out from under the hood. I jumped out of the van. Madison was still strapped inside, her wheelchair locked into the anchor points. I rushed to her door, but in my panic, I forgot that the child locks were still engaged from when Rachel had driven earlier. I yelled to Denise to open the gate so I could get the van through to our driveway and get Madison out safely. She just stood there. "You're not authorized to park here," she shouted again, her voice shrill over Madison's terrified screams. The fire spread fast. Flames licked up from the undercarriage, the acrid smoke making it harder to breathe. I yanked at the door handle until the skin on my palm blistered from the heat. Madison was sobbing, coughing, struggling against the straps. I needed tools. I needed to break the window. I needed to get her out. But Denise wasn't moving. She still didn't know I wasn't just some helpless dad. I was an ex-police commander, and she was about to find out exactly what that meant. Just as I reached for my belt, instinct kicking in, the sound of sirens in the distance pierced the chaos. But it was too late. Something inside the van exploded with a deafening bang, sending shards of metal and glass flying. Madison shrieked. I threw myself over the door, shielding her as best I could. And that's when everything changed. The explosion wasn't big enough to destroy the van, but it sent a blast of heat that made the air shimmer. Pieces of burning plastic rained down around me. I barely noticed the pain in my arm where a chunk of it hit. All I could think about was Madison. She was still trapped inside, crying and coughing so hard her whole body shook. I had seconds to get her out before the flames took over completely. I didn't hesitate. Using the heel of my boot, I smashed the window closest to her, ignoring the way the glass bit into my skin. The jagged edges tore at my hands as I reached through, unlocking the door from the inside. I yanked it open, the heat blasting my face like an open oven. Madison's eyes were wide with terror. "I've got you, baby girl," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. With every ounce of strength I had, I unbuckled her straps, pulled her free from her wheelchair, and cradled her against my chest. She was light, too light, a reminder of all the health battles she'd been fighting for years. I ran. Behind me, the van's engine roared as flames shot higher. The sirens grew louder, closer. Somewhere to my left, I heard Denise screaming, but her words were lost in the chaos. I didn't stop until I was across the street, behind a neighbor's car, setting Madison down gently on the sidewalk. She clung to me, trembling. Her face was streaked with soot, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. I looked up. Several neighbors had come out of their homes, drawn by the noise and smoke. Some were recording with their phones. Others just stood there, frozen. Finally, the fire truck screeched around the corner, lights flashing. Firefighters jumped out, hoses already spraying water toward the burning van. Paramedics rushed over to us. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, checked Madison over carefully while another wrapped a bandage around my bleeding arm. "She's going to be okay," the medic said, smiling reassuringly at Madison. Rachel arrived moments later, her tires screeching as she pulled up. She jumped out of the car, face pale with fear, and ran to us. She dropped to her knees, gathering Madison into her arms, rocking her gently back and forth. I stood up, every muscle in my body vibrating with adrenaline and fury. Denise was standing near the gate, arms flapping as she argued with a police officer. She pointed at me wildly, her voice loud and shrill even from across the street. "He threatened me," she was shouting. "He tried to break through the gate. He endangered the whole community." I marched over, my fists clenched. The officer, a young guy who couldn't have been more than 25, held up his hands. "Sir, please stay back while we—" "I'm former Commander Travis Morgan," I said, pulling out my old badge from my wallet. I carried it out of habit, even though I wasn't on the force anymore. The officer's eyes widened. His whole demeanor changed instantly. "I need her charged," I said, pointing at Denise. "She obstructed emergency action, endangered a minor, and contributed to the destruction of private property." Denise's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She took a step back, her face draining of color. But, the rules, she stammered. I didn't even look at her. I turned back to Madison and Rachel, where they sat together on the sidewalk, surrounded by neighbors who had finally snapped out of their shock and were offering water and wet cloths. One of the neighbors, a man in his 60s named Mr. Bailey, clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good, son," he said gruffly. "Real good." Later that night, after the fire was out and the police had taken statements, we sat around our kitchen table, the three of us. Madison had a new stuffed animal one of the paramedics had given her, a little Dalmatian in a fireman's hat. She clutched it tightly as she sipped hot cocoa. Rachel reached over and squeezed my hand. "You saved her," she whispered. I shook my head. She saved herself. She fought, just like always. I looked around our kitchen. The cracked tiles, the old fridge humming in the corner, the pile of mail still unopened on the counter. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, and I would fight anyone who tried to take it from us. For a few days, things were quiet. Denise kept a low profile. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood about what had happened, and not in the way she had hoped. People whispered when she walked by. Meetings were canceled. Flyers advertising her upcoming neighborhood beautification project mysteriously disappeared from mailboxes. But I knew it wasn't over. Denise wasn't the type to back down. She was the type to double down. And sure enough, about a week later, a letter arrived. Official HOA letterhead. Registered mail. Rachel's hands shook as she opened it. "You have been found in violation of multiple community rules," she read aloud. "A disciplinary hearing has been scheduled." It was signed by Denise herself. The kicker? The hearing wasn't just about us. It was about whether we would be allowed to stay in the neighborhood at all. They were trying to evict us. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "This isn't just about the van," I said slowly. "This is about control. She wants to make an example out of us." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "What are we going to do?" I smiled, a cold, determined smile. "We're going to fight," I said. "And this time we're not playing nice." That weekend we prepared. I dug out my old contacts from my police days, lawyers, advocates, friends in the media. We gathered every piece of documentation we had, medical records, letters from Madison's doctors, a copy of the HOA bylaws. I taught Rachel and Madison how to answer questions calmly, how to stay strong under pressure. Madison, bless her heart, took it like a mission. She even made little index cards with notes on them, just like she did for school presentations. Sunday night, we sat together on the porch. The sky was clear, the stars blinking down at us. "Are you scared, Daddy?" Madison asked. I looked at her, at the fierce little fighter she was. "No," I said honestly. "Not with you by my side." And just as I kissed the top of her head, headlights turned onto our street. A dark SUV crawling slow. I squinted into the darkness. Something about it made the hairs on my neck stand up. Rachel noticed it too. "Who is that?" she whispered. Before I could answer, the SUV came to a stop right in front of our house. And the driver's door opened. Out stepped a man I had never seen before. But something in his posture, the way he carried himself, told me he wasn't just here to chat. The real battle was just beginning, and it was going to get ugly. The man from the SUV stood tall, dressed sharp in a gray suit that didn't match the casual, suburban vibe of Sycamore Hollow Estates. His hair was slicked back, and he wore sunglasses even though it was nighttime. Every alarm bell in my body went off. He approached slowly, hands held just slightly away from his sides like he wanted us to know he wasn't hiding anything, or maybe like he wanted us to think he wasn't. "Mr. Morgan?" he asked, voice smooth like someone used to making deals behind closed doors. I didn't answer. I just shifted a little so I was standing between him and my girls. "My name is Nathan Bell," he said, sliding a card out of his pocket and tossing it onto the porch table. "I represent Sycamore Hollow's Homeowners Association Legal Division." Rachel picked up the card. It was heavy, expensive. The kind that wasn't made at the corner copy shop. You've been served notice for immediate mediation, he continued. Failure to attend the hearing will result in escalated action, including but not limited to fines exceeding $5,000. Rachel gasped. Madison clutched her little stuffed Dalmatian tighter. I crossed my arms. Is this how you usually treat families with disabled children? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Threats and intimidation? Bell smiled slightly like he didn't care either way. I'm just here to deliver the message. Good night. Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked back to his SUV. Tires crunched over the gravel as he disappeared down the street. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Finally, Rachel said, "They're trying to scare us. They're trying to bury us." I corrected, and we couldn't let them. The next morning, we got to work. I called an old friend, Daryl, who had retired from law enforcement and now worked as a private investigator. If there was dirt to be found on Denise and her crooked board, Daryl would find it. While he started digging, Rachel and I went door to door, talking to our neighbors. Some were hesitant at first, scared of rocking the boat. Others opened up almost immediately. Turns out we weren't the only ones Denise had bullied. One family had been fined over a tiny herb garden in their backyard. Another had their kids' lemonade stand shut down for unauthorized commercial activity. There were dozens of small stories, each one a brick in the wall Denise had built to protect her little empire. It wasn't just about Madison or our van. Denise ruled by fear, and maybe, just maybe, people were finally getting tired of it. Later that week, Daryl called. His voice buzzed with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "You know Denise's whole thing about keeping the neighborhood pure and following the rules? She's been renting out her backyard pool to strangers for parties. Cash only. No permits. Totally illegal." I laughed out loud. The hypocrisy was almost too perfect. "We've got her," I said. But winning wouldn't be easy. The HOA board was packed with Denise's loyalists, neighbors she had buttered up or blackmailed over the years. The upcoming hearing was just a show to make it look like she was being fair. If we wanted to beat her, we'd have to expose everything. Publicly, in a way no one could ignore. So we made a plan. On the day of the hearing, Rachel dressed Madison carefully in her favorite purple dress, the one with tiny butterflies stitched into the fabric. Madison's hair was tied back neatly, and she wore a big brave smile even though I could see how nervous she was. We walked into the HOA clubhouse together. The room was packed, not just with board members, but with neighbors, news reporters, thanks to a few quiet tips Daryl made, and even a couple of lawyers I recognized from my old city days. Denise sat at the head of the table, looking smug and confident in a red blazer. She tapped her pen against a stack of papers like a judge about to sentence someone. The first part of the hearing was exactly what I expected. A circus. Denise listed every so-called violation we had ever committed. Parking infractions, landscaping problems, unapproved medical equipment visible from the street, each charge more ridiculous than the last. When she was done, she leaned back and smiled like a cat who had cornered a mouse. "Given the repeated violations," she said sweetly, "it is the recommendation of this board that the Morgans be evicted from Sycamore Hollow Estates." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rachel's hands tightened on Madison's wheelchair handles. I placed a calming hand on hers. "May I speak?" I asked. Denise hesitated, then nodded. I stood, pulling a folder from my briefcase. "First, I'd like to present medical documents verifying that the van is not only necessary, but legally protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act." I handed copies to the board members. Several of them frowned as they read. "Second, I have statements from multiple neighbors who have been unfairly fined or harassed by this board, in clear violation of HOA ethics guidelines." More murmurs. "And third," I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear, "I have evidence that the HOA president, Denise Miller, has been illegally operating a commercial pool rental business without proper licensing or tax reporting." I slapped down photos, receipts, and even social media posts advertising private pool parties. No questions asked. The room exploded. People shouted. Reporters snapped photos. Denise's face turned an alarming shade of red. "This is outrageous," she screeched. "This is irrelevant." "No, ma'am," one of the lawyers said, standing up. "This goes directly to credibility. If you violate the rules you claim to enforce, you cannot claim authority over others." The board members looked at each other, suddenly unsure. Denise saw her power slipping away, and she panicked. She stood up so fast her chair toppled over. "This hearing is over," she shouted. "I'm the president. I make the rules." "No," I said quietly. "Not anymore." And just when I thought it couldn't get more chaotic, the clubhouse doors burst open. 2 uniformed police officers strode in. "Denise Miller?" one asked loudly. Everyone turned. "You're under arrest for obstruction of emergency services, endangerment of a minor, and operating an unlicensed business." The whole room went silent. Denise froze, mouth opening and closing like she couldn't believe this was happening. The officers stepped forward, snapping handcuffs around her wrists. And as they let her out, Madison leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Daddy, you're my hero." I closed my eyes for a moment, overwhelmed. But I knew it wasn't over, because the board still had to decide if we stayed. And not everyone in that room wanted to see us win. We had won the battle. The war was still raging. And then, just as we were gathering our papers, a man stepped out from the back of the room. Someone who hadn't spoken all day. Someone with a dark agenda of his own. He smiled coldly. "Well, now that she's out of the way," he said, voice dripping with false charm, "maybe I can bring some real order to Sycamore Hollow." A new enemy had just appeared, and he might be even worse than Denise. The man was tall, maybe a few years younger than me, dressed in a dark blazer and jeans that looked too expensive for a simple HOA meeting. His hair was neatly styled, and when he smiled, there was no kindness in it, only calculation. "My name's Richard Vaughn," he announced, stepping forward as if he owned the room. "I'm the vice president of the HOA, and now acting president." There were a few half-hearted claps from the board members, mostly out of fear, not support. Rachel stiffened beside me. I could feel the tension rolling off her like heat waves. Madison clutched my hand, sensing something was wrong, even though she didn't understand all the politics happening around her. Richard looked directly at us, his smile widening. "And I believe," he continued, "it's time we discuss the removal of certain residents who have brought nothing but trouble to our peaceful community." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Some were clearly too nervous to oppose him. Others looked trapped, like they didn't know what side to take. I stood up slowly, every muscle in my body tight. "We have every legal right to live here," I said, voice steady. "We followed the rules. We defended ourselves against harassment." Richard chuckled like he found me amusing. "Maybe," he said, "but rules can change. And with Denise gone, there's room for new leadership and new expectations." He turned to the crowd, speaking like a politician at a rally. "Sycamore Hollow deserves better than endless conflict. Better than people who think they're above the law because they cry louder or pull on heartstrings." The words hit hard. A few people nodded. Some muttered angrily under their breath. I felt my blood boil. Rachel whispered, "Travis, don't lose it. That's what he wants." She was right. If I lashed out, I'd only prove his point. I took a deep breath and addressed the room. "My daughter," I said, voice rising, "has fought battles every single day of her life. She fights just to walk, just to breathe sometimes. We didn't move here to break rules or cause trouble. We moved here for peace, for kindness, for community." I paused, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. "And if any of you think we don't deserve to be part of this community," I continued, locking eyes with Richard, "then you need to ask yourself what kind of neighbor you want to be." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Finally, Mr. Bailey, the older man who had supported us before, stood up. "I want neighbors who care about each other," he said loudly, "who don't turn a blind eye when someone's kid is trapped in a burning car." One by one, others began nodding. Some even stood. A young woman in the back, holding a baby, wiped tears from her eyes. Richard's smile faltered just a bit. But he wasn't finished. "I move for an emergency vote," he snapped. "Immediate expulsion of the Morgans for creating a hostile environment." He slammed a sheet of paper down on the table, something he had clearly prepared in advance. The board hesitated. I could see the fear in their eyes. They didn't want to be on the wrong side if Richard won. "We demand a fair hearing," Rachel said, stepping forward, her voice shaking but strong. "You can't just throw us out without due process." Richard ignored her, pointing dramatically at us. "Vote!" he barked. "Now!" The room tensed. Then, from the back, a voice spoke up. "Actually," said a new figure stepping inside, "under HOA law, no vote can happen without proper notice to all residents and a 30-day review period." The man was tall, dressed simply in jeans and a battered leather jacket. His face was rugged, serious. I recognized him instantly, Logan Tate, a civil rights attorney and one of Daryl's old friends. Logan walked to the front of the room and dropped a thick binder on the table. "I represent the Morgans," he said coolly. "And if you move forward with this illegal vote, I'll have a lawsuit filed in federal court by morning." Gasps again. Richard's face turned red, then white. He opened his mouth to argue, but Logan raised a hand. "And before you embarrass yourself, you should know," Logan said. "I specialize in suing HOA boards for discrimination." Rachel let out a shaky breath. Madison squeezed my hand tighter. For a moment, the whole world seemed to pause. Finally, one of the board members, an older woman named Mrs. Lowry, cleared her throat. "I make a motion," she said. "We table any action against the Morgans pending a full legal review." Several hands shot up immediately. "Seconded." "Third." Within seconds, the meeting dissolved into chaos. Richard Vaughn slammed his fist on the table, glaring at us like a man who had just been robbed of his prize. But he was powerless. For now. As the crowd began filing out, Logan turned to us. "You've got a lot of friends you didn't know you had," he said quietly. Rachel wiped a tear from her cheek. "Thank you. We thought we were alone." "You're never alone," he said. "Bullies win when people stay quiet. You fought back. That's what matters." We left the clubhouse under a sky full of stars, feeling lighter than we had in weeks. But deep down, I knew Richard Vaughn wasn't going to just roll over. Men like him didn't know how to lose gracefully. Sure enough, that night, as we sat around the living room trying to decompress, our security camera pinged with an alert. "Motion detected at the front door." I checked the feed on my phone, and my stomach dropped. A shadowy figure stood at our porch, spray paint in hand. Before I could react, the figure scrawled something across our front door in huge, dripping letters. "Get out, cripple family." Rachel gasped. Madison started crying, burying her face in her stuffed Dalmatian. I jumped up, heart pounding, and ran for the door. But by the time I flung it open, the figure was gone, vanished into the night. And we were left staring at the hateful words burning on our home. The battle wasn't over. It had just gotten personal. I stood frozen at the door, fists clenched so tight my knuckles cracked. The words sprayed across the front of our home in blood-red paint weren't just vandalism. They were a threat, a message. Rachel came up behind me, wrapping her arms around Madison, shielding her from the worst of it. Madison's tiny sobs broke something deep inside me. No family should ever have to see their home defaced like that, especially not a child like Madison. "I'm calling the police," Rachel said, her voice shaking with rage. "No," I said, grabbing my phone. "I'll call someone I trust." Within minutes, Daryl pulled up, his headlights sweeping across the driveway. He was still wearing his pajamas under a leather jacket, but he moved like he was ready for war. He took one look at the door, and his mouth tightened into a hard line. "I pulled security footage from the camera," I said, handing him my phone. He studied it, rewinding and zooming in. Though the figure wore a hoodie and kept their head down, something about the body language, the walk, the arrogance, felt familiar. "That's Richard," Daryl said finally. "I'd bet my pension on it." My blood boiled hotter than it had all night. "We need proof," Rachel said quietly, holding Madison close. "And we'll get it," Daryl promised. He set up extra cameras around the house that night, hidden ones. He also placed motion sensors at the corners of the yard. If anyone even sneezed near our home, we'd know. The next day, Rachel and I scrubbed the hateful message off the door, while Madison stayed with Mr. Bailey's family next door. Half the neighborhood came by to help. People who had stayed silent before but now realized staying silent only gave bullies more power. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But by noon, the door was clean. Still, the damage lingered in ways a scrub brush couldn't fix. That evening, we gathered in the living room, going over our options. "If we press charges," Rachel said, "it'll make things worse. He's dangerous. If we don't," I said, "he'll think he can do anything." "I don't want to leave," Madison whispered suddenly. "This is my home." Her voice was so small, but it held more strength than I had seen from any adult. Rachel and I looked at each other, and that was it. We weren't running. We were staying. We were fighting. 2 nights later, Daryl called, his voice electric with excitement. "Got him." He emailed me the footage. It showed Richard, clear as day, returning to our porch around midnight, this time trying to stick a dead rat in our mailbox. I forwarded the footage to Logan and called the police. When the officers arrived, they didn't waste time. Within an hour, Richard Vaughn was sitting in the back of a police cruiser, shouting every excuse in the book. "I was framed," he yelled. "This is a setup. They're lying." No one believed him. At the emergency HOA meeting that followed, the board, now backed into a corner with reporters flashing cameras in their faces, voted unanimously to ban Richard from holding any HOA position ever again. They also voted to strip Denise's name off every plaque and every document she had ever touched. The new acting president was Mrs. Lowry, the sweet older lady who had seconded the motion to delay our eviction. Her first order of business was passing a resolution protecting all residents with medical needs from discrimination, in Madison's name. The neighborhood transformed almost overnight. People started waving again when we passed. Kids chalked bright rainbows and welcome home messages on the sidewalks. The walls of silence that had made Sycamore Hollow cold and cruel cracked wide open. And Madison? She became something of a little celebrity. Neighbors invited her to birthday parties, and the community pool even installed a lift so she could swim safely. One evening, after a big block party where Madison had laughed and danced with other kids, she pulled me aside. "You're not just my hero, Daddy," she said, beaming up at me. "You're everybody's hero." Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I just smiled and hugged her tight. We had stood up to bullies. We had fought back when it would have been easier to run. We had stayed true to kindness and courage, even when the world around us wanted to push us out. And in the end, it wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about changing hearts, about building something better, something real. As the sun set behind the rooftops of Sycamore Hollow, I sat on the porch, Rachel beside me, Madison playing in the yard with a group of friends. The stars began peeking out one by one. For the first time in a long time, peace wasn't just a dream. It was our reality, and it was sweeter than anything I could have imagined. Ever been in this type of situation before? Let me know in the comments section. Like and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. Kindly let us know where you are watching from.